The Morrison family estate gleamed with Christmas splendor, its Georgian facade draped in tasteful white lights that cast dancing shadows across the circular driveway. Sarah Morrison pulled her beat-up Honda between her brother's new BMW and her sister's Range Rover, already feeling the familiar knot in her stomach that came with family gatherings. Inside, the dining room buzzed with conversation. 23 relatives filled the mahogany table that had hosted Morrison Christmas dinners for 3 generations. Sarah slipped in quietly, her wool coat still damp from the December rain. "Sarah!" Her cousin James raised his wineglass mockingly. "Look who finally made it. How's the computer thing going?" Before she could respond, her father's voice boomed from the head of the table. Richard Morrison commanded attention even at 65, his silver hair perfectly styled, his navy suit impeccable despite the informal setting. "Now that we're all here," Richard announced, tapping his knife against crystal, "I have an announcement." Sarah's heart quickened. She'd been hoping to share her own news first. The Series B funding round that had just closed, valuing her AI startup at $50 million. Her company, Neuralink Solutions, had finally gained serious traction. "As you know, I've been considering succession planning." Richard's eyes swept the table, lingering on his son Marcus, 32 and already a partner at Boston's most prestigious law firm. The Morrison legacy represents 4 generations of building something real, something lasting. Elena, Sarah's older sister, squeezed her husband's hand. At 35, she'd married into old Connecticut money and never worked a day, but somehow that made her more respectable in Richard's eyes. "Marcus will inherit Morrison Properties and the commercial holdings," Richard continued. "Elena will receive the family estate and investment portfolio." Sarah's chest tightened. The room fell silent, except for the crackling fire. "And Sarah?" Aunt Catherine asked, her voice carefully neutral. Richard's gaze finally landed on his youngest daughter. Sarah chose her path when she dropped out of Stanford to chase fantasies. Real success is built on solid ground, not pipe dreams about computers and artificial intelligence. The words hit like physical blows. Sarah felt heat creep up her neck as snickers rippled around the table. "Dad, I just closed a $50 million funding round," she began. "Monopoly money," Richard cut her off. "You embarrassed this family by abandoning your education for some Silicon Valley nonsense. Success means building something that lasts, not chasing the latest fad." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Dad, maybe we should discuss this privately." "No." Richard's voice hardened. "Sarah needs to understand consequences. She's chosen to reject everything this family stands for. Why should she benefit from what we've built?" Sarah looked desperately toward her mother, Margaret, who sat frozen at the opposite end of the table. Their eyes met briefly before Margaret looked away, her silence cutting deeper than Richard's words. The extended family watched with the fascination of spectators at a gladiator match. Cousin James smirked openly. Uncle Robert nodded approvingly. Even the children seemed to sense the drama, their whispers carrying across the room. "You could still come work for Morrison Properties," Richard offered, his tone suggesting magnanimity. "Start at the bottom, prove yourself the right way. Maybe then we'll reconsider." Sarah stood slowly, her legs unsteady. Every face turned toward her, some pitying, others smugly satisfied. The grandfather clock chimed 9 times, each toll echoing through the cavernous room. "Merry Christmas, everyone," she said quietly, then walked out, leaving her coat behind. The December air bit through her thin sweater as she fumbled for her car keys, hands shaking with humiliation and rage. Behind her, the warm, golden light of the estate windows seemed to mock her exile. 4 years of 18-hour days, of building something revolutionary from nothing, reduced to embarrassing family gossip. She'd show them what real success looked like. Sarah's Beacon Hill apartment felt like a tomb in January's gray light. She'd barely left since Christmas, surviving on coffee and takeout while obsessively reviewing financial projections. The funding celebration she'd planned never happened. How could she celebrate when her own family saw her success as worthless? The knock came on a Tuesday morning. Aunt Catherine stood in the hallway, her face grim. "We need to talk," Catherine said, pushing past Sarah into the sparse living room. Sarah had spent every penny on the company. Her furniture consisted of a futon, folding table, and towers of business books. Catherine settled onto the futon's edge, her Chanel suit incongruous in the Spartan space. "I can't stay long. Richard would disown me if he knew I was here." "What's wrong?" Sarah poured coffee into mismatched mugs. "It's what Richard's been doing to you." Catherine's voice dropped. "Sarah, he's been sabotaging your business for years." The mug slipped from Sarah's hands, shattering against the hardwood floor. Coffee splattered across her bare feet, but she barely noticed. "What are you talking about?" Catherine pulled out her phone, scrolling through emails. "My husband golfs with Tom Bradley at Sequoia Capital. Tom mentioned how strange it was that Richard Morrison called him last year, warning about his own daughter's instability." Sarah's vision blurred. "He what?" "Richard told multiple investors you were unreliable, emotionally unstable, and that your technology was stolen from Stanford research." Catherine's voice was barely audible. "He's used every connection to poison wells before you could drink from them." The room spun. Sarah gripped the folding table until her knuckles turned white. "How many?" "At least 6 major firms. Probably more." Catherine showed her phone screen, a forwarded email chain discussing the Morrison girls' mental health concerns and family liability issues. Sarah stumbled to her laptop, frantically searching her rejected funding applications. The patterns emerged like a horrific constellation, promising initial meetings followed by sudden radio silence. Investors who'd seemed enthusiastic, mysteriously backing out without explanation. "Why?" The word came out as a whisper. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "He thought you'd fail on your own and come crawling back. When you didn't, when you actually started succeeding, it threatened everything he believes about himself." Memories crystallized with painful clarity. Richard's dismissive comments about women in business whenever Sarah brought up her plans. His strategic scheduling of family events during her biggest presentations. The way he'd steered conversations away whenever relatives asked about her company. "The inheritance meeting," Sarah said slowly. "He planned it." Catherine nodded. "He wanted you humiliated enough to give up and join Morrison Properties. He actually bet Marcus $50,000 that you'd be begging for a job within 6 months." The betrayal cut deeper than disinheritance. Her own father hadn't just withheld support, he'd actively sabotaged her dreams, then punished her for not achieving them fast enough. "There's more," Catherine continued reluctantly. "The family's been taking bets on when you'll fail. Elena started a pool last Christmas. Even some of the cousins contributed." Sarah laughed bitterly. The sound echoed off the empty walls like breaking glass. Her family hadn't just rejected her, they'd weaponized her ambition against her, turning her dreams into their entertainment. "Margaret knows? Your mother?" Catherine's silence was answer enough. Sarah walked to the window overlooking the harbor. Ice crystals decorated the glass in intricate patterns, beautiful and cold. Below, the city bustled with purpose, while she stood frozen in revelation. Her phone buzzed with notifications, investor meetings, partnership proposals, employee updates. 50 people depended on her leadership, believed in her vision. They saw potential where her family saw embarrassment. The rage that had simmered since Christmas transformed into something harder, more focused. They'd counted on her breaking. Instead, they'd forged her into something unbreakable. "Catherine," she said quietly, not turning from the window. "Thank you for telling me." "What will you do?" Sarah's reflection smiled back from the glass, cold and determined. "I'm going to win." The revelation became Sarah's religion. She printed Catherine's emails, pinning them above her desk like commandments carved in betrayal. Every morning she read Richard's sabotage correspondence before checking her own company metrics. The pain transformed into precision. February brought brutal focus. Sarah moved into Neuralink's Cambridge office, converting a supply closet into a bedroom. Her futon and folding table relocated to the break room. If her family expected her to fail, she'd eliminate every variable except success. "You're living here now?" asked David Chen, her CTO and only remaining friend from Stanford. "Rent money goes to server costs," Sarah replied, debugging code at 3 a.m. Dark circles rimmed her eyes, but they burned with newfound intensity. Every dollar counts. The pivot came in March. Sarah abandoned consumer applications, too dependent on marketing budgets she didn't have. Instead, she focused Neuralink's AI on enterprise supply chain optimization. Unsexy but essential, especially as global logistics faced pandemic-era disruptions. She worked 18-hour days, surviving on energy drinks and spite. Weekends meant nothing. Holidays were coding opportunities. While other entrepreneurs networked at conferences, Sarah built algorithms that could predict supply chain failures weeks in advance. The breakthrough came during a sleepless Tuesday in June. Her AI correctly predicted a semiconductor shortage that would cripple electronics manufacturing. Sarah called every tech company in her database, offering early warning services. 3 Fortune 500 companies signed contracts within a week. By August, Neuralink employed 15 people. By December 2020, 35. Sarah hired strategically, targeting top talent from established firms with offers they couldn't refuse. She particularly enjoyed recruiting from companies that had connections to Richard's network. "Sarah Morrison is building something special," whispered the venture capital community. The same investors who'd ghosted her after Richard's warnings now sent polite inquiry emails. She ignored them all. The real strategy began in 2021. Sarah researched Morrison Properties obsessively, studying every deal, every partnership, every vulnerability. Richard's empire was impressive but aging, too dependent on traditional commercial real estate, slow to adapt to remote work trends. She began her campaign subtly. When Morrison Properties bid on a Miami development project, Sarah's team approached the same client with AI-driven logistics solutions that would reduce their operational costs by 30%. The client chose innovation over tradition. It happened again in Chicago, then Phoenix, then Seattle. "We're hemorrhaging deals to some tech company," Marcus complained during a family dinner Sarah learned about through LinkedIn posts. "They're undercutting us with promises about smart buildings and predictive maintenance." Richard dismissed it as coincidence. Real estate is about relationships, not computers. Sarah hired Rebecca Martinez, Morrison Properties head of development, doubling her salary and offering equity. Then she recruited James Sullivan, their top project manager, with a signing bonus equal to his annual Morrison salary. Finally, she poached their CFO, Asa Seos, brilliant woman Richard had consistently passed over for promotion. Each departure sent shockwaves through Richard's organization. His remaining employees grew nervous, updating their LinkedIn profiles and responding to headhunter calls. By early 2022, Neuralink's valuation hit $500 million. Sarah used the Series C funding to purchase commercial properties directly, competing with Morrison projects in their core markets. She offered clients something Richard couldn't: buildings that learned, adapted, and optimized themselves. The coup de grace began quietly. Sarah created a shell company, Beacon Holdings, to purchase Morrison Properties' outstanding debts. She worked through intermediaries, acquiring loans from banks eager to reduce their exposure to traditional real estate. Richard never suspected his biggest creditor was his disowned daughter. By Christmas 2022, Sarah owned 47% of Morrison Properties' debt. She could call it in at any time, effectively controlling her father's empire. But she waited, watching the company struggle as its best talent fled and its competitive advantages eroded. David found her in the office on New Year's Eve, staring at Morrison Properties' stock chart on her monitor. "You know you've already won, right?" he said gently. Sarah's smile was sharp as winter ice. "Not yet. Winning means they understand what they lost." The Forbes notification arrived on her phone 11 months later. She read it twice before the words sank in. 40 under 40. Sarah Morrison, 32. Neuralink Solutions. 2.8 billion valuation. It was time for the family reunion. The first crack appeared in February 2023. Richard Morrison stared at the quarterly report his CFO should have prepared. Except Jennifer had left for Neuralink Solutions 3 months ago, along with his head of development and top project manager. "Who the hell is this tech company?" Richard demanded, throwing the financial documents across his mahogany desk. The Morrison Properties logo, embossed in gold, caught the morning light mockingly. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in the leather chair opposite his father. At 36, he'd grown tired of being Richard's emotional support system, but family duty demanded his presence. Neuralink Solutions, Marcus read from his notes. They're some kind of artificial intelligence company focused on supply chain optimization and smart building technology. Smart buildings, Richard spat the words. Buildings are concrete and steel, not computers. But the damage was undeniable. The Riverside Development Project in Austin had chosen Neuralink's intelligent infrastructure over Morrison's proven track record. The client explained that AI-driven climate control and predictive maintenance would save them millions annually. Richard's traditional approach suddenly seemed antiquated. Then came Chicago. Morrison Properties had courted the Millennium Plaza renovation for 8 months, nurturing relationships, preparing detailed proposals. The client chose a Neuralink partnership instead, citing revolutionary efficiency improvements. "They're offering something we can't match," admitted Tom Bradley, Morrison's new CFO and Richard's golf partner. "Their AI can predict equipment failures, optimize energy usage, even forecast tenant behavior patterns. Our buildings just exist." Richard's jaw clenched. Buildings that have housed successful businesses for decades. Phoenix fell next, then Denver. Each lost to the same mysterious tech company. Richard noticed the pattern, but couldn't understand the strategy. Who was financing this aggressive expansion? The personnel hemorrhaging accelerated. Sarah Martinez from accounting left for a 40% raise. 2 junior architects departed for Neuralink's Boston office. The company's institutional knowledge walked out the door carrying laptops and contact lists. "It's like they know exactly who to target," Marcus observed during their weekly crisis meeting. "They're offering packages specifically designed to poach our best people." Richard tried reaching out through industry connections, seeking intelligence on his competitor. The responses puzzled him. Neuralink's CEO was young, brilliant, and ruthlessly focused. Female. Stanford dropout who'd built the company from nothing. Something nagged at his memory, but he couldn't place it. Margaret noticed the change first, her husband's confident swagger replaced by distracted irritation. He snapped at servers, argued with the gardener, and spent hours locked in his study making increasingly desperate phone calls. "Maybe you should consider retirement," she suggested gently over dinner. "You've built something wonderful. Let Marcus take over." "I'm 68, not dead," Richard snapped. "Some upstart tech company isn't going to destroy 4 generations of Morrison legacy." But the stock price disagreed. Morrison Properties had dropped 37% since January. Board members made pointed comments about adapting to market changes and considering strategic partnerships. Several suggested exploring acquisition offers. The breaking point came in October. Morrison Properties' biggest client, Henderson Commercial Group, terminated their exclusive partnership. 23 years of collaboration ended with a corporate form letter citing evolving business needs. Richard called Henderson personally. "Bob, we've worked together since you started your company. What's this really about?" Bob Henderson's voice carried genuine regret. "Dick, I'm sorry, but this neural link outfit can reduce our operational costs by 30% while improving tenant satisfaction. I can't ignore numbers like that." "Since when do you care about tenant satisfaction?" "Since empty office buildings became my biggest problem. Remote work killed traditional commercial real estate, Dick. These AI systems adapt to changing usage patterns, optimize space allocation, predict maintenance issues. It's not just smart, it's survival." Richard hung up, staring at his empty office. The same space where he'd celebrated Henderson's first deal, where they'd planned expansion strategies, where handshake agreements had built both their empires. Marcus found him there an hour later, still clutching the phone. "Dad, the board called an emergency meeting for next week." Richard's voice was barely audible. "What do they want?" "To discuss leadership transition and potential acquisition opportunities." Marcus paused. "Dad, who is Sarah Morrison?" Richard's blood turned to ice. "What?" "Sarah Morrison. She's Neuralink's CEO. The name keeps coming up in our intelligence reports." Marcus consulted his tablet. "Same last name as us. Coincidence?" The memory crashed over Richard like a tsunami. Christmas dinner 4 years ago. Sarah's humiliated face as she walked out. Her pathetic little computer company that he dismissed as fantasy. His youngest daughter had built an empire to destroy his own. December 23rd, 2023. 4 years to the day. Sarah Morrison parked her Tesla Model S in the same spot where her Honda had sat that terrible Christmas Eve. The Morrison estate looked smaller somehow, its Georgian grandeur dimmed by financial strain. The white lights were LED now, a cost-cutting measure that would have been unthinkable in Richard's prosperous years. She stepped out wearing a simple black dress that cost more than most people's monthly salary, though its elegance lay in subtlety rather than ostentation. Her assistant had offered to accompany her, but this confrontation required solitude. The family gathering was smaller this year. Economic reality had culled the peripheral relatives who'd once filled the mahogany table. Uncle Robert's construction company had folded. Cousin James worked for his father-in-law now, his smugness replaced by desperation. Even Elena seemed diminished, her husband's old money proving insufficient in modern markets. Margaret opened the door, her face a mask of carefully controlled emotion. Mother and daughter studied each other for a long moment. Margaret seeing the confident woman Sarah had become, Sarah recognizing the guilt her mother carried. "You came," Margaret whispered. "I said I would." The dining room fell silent as Sarah entered. Richard sat at his usual position, but his commanding presence had withered. His hair was whiter, his suit less perfectly tailored. The man who dismissed her dreams with imperial certainty now looked like what he was, a failing businessman facing obsolescence. Marcus stood, uncertain whether to embrace his sister or maintain distance. Elena remained seated, her expression unreadable. The remaining relatives watched with the fascination of spectators at an execution, uncertain who would be the victim. "Sarah." Richard's voice carried none of its former authority. "Thank you for coming." She took her old seat, the one furthest from his throne, where she'd absorbed his contempt for years. The symmetry was deliberate. "I assume you know why I'm here," she said calmly. Richard's hands trembled slightly as he reached for his wine glass. Forbes called, "Congratulations on the recognition." The magazine lay open on the sideboard, her photograph beneath the headline, "Tech Visionary Disrupts Commercial Real Estate." The article detailed Neuralink's meteoric rise and Sarah's revolutionary approach to intelligent infrastructure. But it was the valuation that had shattered Richard's remaining pride. $2.8 billion. 40 under 40, Sarah mused. Number 3 this year. Not bad for a Stanford dropout chasing fantasies. The words hung in the air like an indictment. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Elena studied her manicure. Margaret's knuckles were white around her napkin. "Sarah, about what I said," Richard began. "About what you did," she corrected. "I know about the investors, Dad. The warnings about my instability. The systematic sabotage of my funding rounds. The betting pool on my failure." Richard's face crumpled. "How? Does it matter?" Sarah's voice remained steady, professional. "What matters is results. Your company is hemorrhaging talent, losing clients, facing bankruptcy. My company revolutionized an entire industry and employs over 300 people." She reached into her purse, withdrawing a leather folder. The documents inside represented months of careful legal maneuvering. "Beacon Holdings," she announced, sliding papers across the polished mahogany. "My shell company owns 63% of Morrison Properties' outstanding debt. As of today, I control your life's work." Richard's wineglass shattered against the floor, red spreading across Persian carpet like blood. The sound echoed through the cavernous room. "That's impossible," he whispered. "You taught me that real success is built on solid ground. I built my foundation while you undermined yours." Sarah's smile was ice-cold mercy. "I'm calling in the debts, Dad. All of them." The family erupted. Elena shrieked about estates and inheritances. Marcus demanded explanations about legal implications. Cousins babbled about family loyalty and forgiveness. Sarah raised her hand, and silence fell instantly. The gesture commanded respect that Richard no longer possessed. "I'm not vindictive," she continued. "I'm offering the same generous terms you offered me 4 years ago." She paused, letting the parallel sink in. "Come work for me. Start at the bottom. Prove yourself. Maybe then I'll reconsider." Richard aged a decade in that moment. The proud patriarch who'd ruled through intimidation and dismissal faced the complete reversal of his power. His empire belonged to the daughter he'd rejected, his legacy controlled by the child he'd tried to destroy. "Sarah, please," Margaret spoke for the first time. "He's your father." "Yes," Sarah acknowledged. "The father who sabotaged my business. The father who turned my dreams into family, entertainment. The father who publicly humiliated me in this very room." She stood, her black dress flowing like judicial robes. Every eye followed her movement. "But I'm not him." The words carried weight beyond their simplicity. "Morrison Properties will become a subsidiary of Neuralink Solutions. You'll keep minority ownership and a consulting role, Dad. The family keeps the estate, but as tenants rather than owners." Richard's voice broke completely. "Why?" Sarah looked at him, really looked, seeing past the arrogant businessman to the frightened old man beneath. Fear had driven his cruelty, Insecurity had fueled his need to diminish her achievements. "Because real success isn't about revenge," she said quietly. "It's about proving yourself right, not proving others wrong." She walked toward the door, then paused. "Merry Christmas, everyone. The lawyers will contact you after the holidays." The December air felt warm against her face as she stepped outside. Behind her, the Morrison estate's windows glowed with confused, desperate conversations. Her Tesla started silently, its electric engine a quiet revolution against the old order. As she drove away, Sarah's phone buzzed with notifications. Investor calls, partnership proposals, interview requests. The world wanted her attention, her vision, her leadership. Her father would never understand that the greatest victory wasn't taking his empire. It was no longer needing his approval. 6 months later, June 2024, the merger documents bore both signatures, Richard Morrison's shaky scrawl beneath Sarah's confident script. Morrison Properties officially became a Neuralink subsidiary at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that felt more like an ending than a beginning. Sarah stood in her corner office 40 floors above Boston Harbor, watching tugboats guide cargo ships toward port. The metaphor wasn't lost on her. She'd spent 4 years becoming the tugboat, guiding her family's massive vessel away from the rocks. The immediate aftermath had been brutal. Richard suffered a mild heart attack on New Year's Day, his body finally succumbing to months of accumulated stress. Sarah visited him in Massachusetts General, finding him diminished beneath hospital blankets, monitors beeping steadily around his bed. "I'm sorry," he'd whispered, his voice barely audible above the machines. "I was afraid." "Of what?" "That you were better than me." The admission came with tears that surprised them both. "I built everything on intimidation and control. You built something that actually mattered." Sarah had held his hand then, feeling how fragile he'd become. The powerful patriarch who'd terrified her childhood was just a frightened man who'd confused authority with worth. The restructuring took months. Sarah kept her promise. Richard retained 15% ownership and served as special advisor on traditional commercial development. It was largely ceremonial, but it preserved his dignity while acknowledging his expertise. More importantly, it gave him purpose beyond resentment. The family dynamics shifted like tectonic plates. Elena's husband lost his hedge fund position, forcing them to downsize from their Greenwich estate to a modest Boston brownstone. Elena, surprisingly, thrived in the reduced circumstances. Without the pressure of maintaining social status, she discovered talents she'd never explored. She enrolled in interior design courses and eventually joined Neuralink's facilities planning team. "I never realized how much I enjoyed creating spaces," Elena confessed during one of their newfound sister lunches. "I was so busy being ornamental that I forgot I could be functional." Marcus presented the biggest challenge. His law firm partnership had dissolved under the weight of Morrison Properties' legal troubles, leaving him professionally adrift. Sarah offered him a position as Neuralink's general counsel, but pride initially prevented his acceptance. "I can't work for my little sister," he'd protested during a tense family dinner in March. "Then don't work for your little sister," Sarah replied calmly. "Work for the CEO of a $3 billion company who happens to be your sister." The distinction mattered more than she'd expected. Marcus eventually joined Neuralink and proved surprisingly gifted at technology law, particularly intellectual property protection. His traditional legal training complemented Sarah's disruptive approach perfectly. Margaret's transformation was perhaps the most profound. For decades, she defined herself through Richard's achievements, her identity subsumed into his success. With that dynamic shattered, she emerged as her own person for the first time in 30 years. "I should have defended you," Margaret told Sarah during a quiet moment in April. They were walking through the public garden, watching swan boats carry tourists around the lagoon. "You were protecting yourself," Sarah replied without judgment. "I understand that now." Margaret had started volunteering at a women's entrepreneurship center, mentoring young businesswomen facing family opposition. Her experiences as both victim and bystander gave her unique insight into the dynamics that crush ambition. The extended family required more delicate handling. Cousin James, Uncle Robert, and the others who'd participated in the betting pool found themselves gradually excluded from family gatherings. Sarah didn't banish them. She simply stopped caring about their approval. Without Richard's authority to validate their cruelty, they became irrelevant. The business integration exceeded expectations. Neuralink's AI systems revolutionized Morrison's traditional properties, reducing operational costs by 43% while improving tenant satisfaction dramatically. The old buildings learned new tricks, optimizing everything from elevator efficiency to climate control. Richard, to everyone's surprise, became one of the integration's strongest advocates. His deep understanding of commercial real estate, combined with Sarah's technological vision, created innovations neither could have achieved alone. "Buildings should serve people, not the other way around," he mused during a board meeting in May. "Your AI makes that possible in ways I never imagined." The industry noticed. Harvard Business School wrote a case study about the Morrison-Neuralink merger, focusing on how traditional industries could evolve through technological partnership rather than technological replacement. Sarah was invited to speak at conferences worldwide, but she declined most invitations. Building mattered more than talking about building. The hollowness Sarah had feared never materialized. Revenge had been a vehicle, not a destination. The real victory was creating something meaningful while helping her family discover their own potential. Christmas 2024. The dining room looked different, with fewer people but more authenticity. Richard sat beside Margaret, their relationship rebuilt on honesty rather than hierarchy. Elena arranged flowers she'd grown herself, finding joy in creation rather than consumption. Marcus played chess with his teenage nephew, patient where he'd once been dismissive. Sarah arrived with David Chen, her relationship with her CTO having evolved beyond professional partnership into something deeper. They'd bonded over late-night coding sessions and shared dreams of technological possibility. "Any regrets?" David asked quietly as they watched the family interact. Sarah considered the question seriously. 4 years ago, she'd sat in this room broken and humiliated. Tonight, she saw people who'd learned to value substance over appearance, effort over inheritance. "Just one," she admitted. "I wish it hadn't taken so long to realize that proving them wrong was less important than proving myself right." Richard raised his glass, his hand steady now. "To Sarah," he said simply, "who taught us that success isn't what you inherit, it's what you build?" The toast echoed around the smaller table, genuine appreciation replacing performative tradition. Outside, Boston's lights twinkled like earthbound stars, illuminating a city where anything remained possible for those willing to build rather than merely claim. Sarah smiled, finally understanding that the best inheritance wasn't money or property. It was the knowledge that love, like success, grew stronger when shared rather than hoarded. The grandfather clock chimed midnight, welcoming Christmas with the promise of new beginnings.